Hey, my name is Dan Fugate, and I serve on the staff of the Indiana-Kentucky Synod. I'm filling in for Corey Driver this week on Moving Forward. This week's first reading from Exodus is the Ten Commandments. You can't get much more familiar than the Ten Commandments. They've been memorized by confirmation students, explained by Martin Luther answering that question, what does this mean? They've been posted in courthouses and carved on monuments. God speaks these words, and they are about relationship. I am the Lord. I am your God. I brought you out of the land of Egypt. I brought you out of the house of slavery. I am your God. You are the people I have saved. Relationship. God introduces the Ten Commandments with this personal statement about what God has done on their behalf. And so obedience to the commandments is about a response to this relationship rather than obedience to a law. God personally interacted with the people of Israel while they journeyed through the wilderness, and so this giving of the commandments is a continuation of this personal interaction, this personal relationship. The Ten Commandments are so very familiar that I don't want to spend too much time talking about them, but this theme of relationship with God connects them with the gospel. This week's gospel is from the second chapter of John, and it's the account of the temple incident when Jesus drives the sellers and the money changers and livestock out of the temple. This temple incident is in all four gospels, but the first thing to notice is when it happens in John's gospel. In Matthew, Mark, and Luke, it follows Jesus' triumphal entry into Jerusalem, and it really functions as the final public act of Jesus' ministry, which causes the authorities to make the decision to arrest and kill him. In John's gospel, though, this temple incident comes immediately after Jesus' first sign at the beginning of his ministry, the wedding at Cana, where Jesus turns water into wine. When Jesus goes to Jerusalem, the Passover is near, and the temple was in a time of preparation. People traveled to Jerusalem early in order to purify themselves for the Passover. We're in the season of Lent, and we practice Lenten disciplines as we prepare ourselves to celebrate again the resurrection of Jesus. Jesus doesn't really find a scene of spiritual preparation in Jerusalem. Instead, he finds at the temple those who sold oxen, sheep, and doves. But that's not really a criticism because that was necessary. People coming from far away couldn't bring their own animals to sacrifice. It'd be difficult to maintain an animal in perfect condition, even making a trip from nearby Galilee, and it'd be impossible for someone coming from a long way away. Money exchange was also necessary. Travelers brought coins from wherever they had come from, but yet coins from the city of Tyre, which were considered to be of a more accurate weight and a superior quality, were the only ones that could be used to pay the temple tax, so money had to be exchanged. The atmosphere at the temple would have been like a street fair with dozens or maybe hundreds of vendors, except they were feeding and grooming and cleaning up after large animals rather than selling funnel cakes or elephant ears. Jesus made a whip of cords and drove them all out of the temple. He poured out the money of the money changers, and he overturned their tables. He told the dove sellers to take the doves out, and he said, "Stop making my Father's house a marketplace." He doesn't say a den of thieves like he does in the other Gospels. It doesn't seem like he's reacting to unethical business practices. Instead, he seems to be objecting to their very presence. Underneath this statement that Jesus makes is the idea that the temple itself isn't necessary. The religious authorities ask for proof that Jesus has the right to do what he has just done. They ask him, "What sign can you show us?" Well, if what Jesus had just done was illegal, this isn't the response that you would expect from the leaders. It seems like they're almost inviting Jesus to bring them on board with what he's doing rather than being hostile with him. But of course, we know that can change pretty quickly. Jesus said, "Destroy this temple, and in 3 days I will raise it up." Now, there's not anybody that could get on board with Jesus on this one. The temple was holy, and it was the dwelling place of God. No one could imagine destroying the temple, although the Romans would do so in 70 CE. The leaders take Jesus' statement quite literally. They think Jesus is talking about the temple that they're standing in. But the gospel tells us that Jesus was talking about his body. He's alluding to his death and his resurrection. His body will be destroyed and in 3 days raised. No one understands what he's talking about, not even his disciples. This conversation with the religious leaders sheds some light on Jesus' later encounter with the woman at the well. When the woman at the well asked Jesus where the proper place to worship is, Mount Gerizim or Jerusalem, Jesus says neither on this mountain or in Jerusalem. Even later in John 9, when the man who is blind sees Jesus, his response is to worship Jesus. Jesus himself is the presence of God. The temple symbolized the location and presence of God, and through this temple incident, Jesus is saying that he is the presence of God. In Jesus, God is right there, right in front of them. At the beginning of John's Gospel, John says that the Word became flesh and lived among us. John says no one has seen God. It is God the only Son who is close to the Father's heart, who has made God known. The temple was a holy place where God and humans met. In the incarnation, the Word made flesh dwelling among us. God's dwelling place is with human beings. So where does God meet us? Where do we see God? That's a question some have struggled with during this pandemic, especially if the church sanctuary was the only place one expected to encounter God. We can see God in a church sanctuary for sure, but we also can see God in music, in the water and word of baptism, in the bread and wine of the sacrament of the altar, in a loved one, in an act of service, in the person who comes to the food pantry or for a free meal, in the one who's grieving, in a youth who's anxious, in a stranger. The Gospel of John makes this bold claim that the location of God is not in the temple, but in the body of Jesus. God was made flesh and dwells among us. God is with us wherever we are, 24/7. God is with you now and always.